So that is the basic rewind of what we have done last week, last session. So today we'll be talking about again more in depth about artificial neural network and its components. This is the agenda for today. I hope everyone is able to share the see the screen, right? Okay. Yeah. So this is the agenda we'll be covering today. We'll be talking about what is artificial neural network and more in depth about what are the components that are present inside it. What is a feed forward neural network and how do you compute the values in a feed forward neural network. We'll talk about loss function, which is the one which actually tries to give the knowledge for the neural network. We'll see how that happens. And gradient descent and backpropagation. These are the things that help the neural network train themselves from looking at the data. So we'll be talking about these in more strength today. And similarly, we'll talk about various hyperparameters that are involved, which will help you in tuning the neural network. So we have seen that automation is taking the job of a person, right? But what is the job of a machine learning engineer? The job of the machine learning engineer is the last thing that I have shown here. It is the hyperparameter tuning. So what a human needs to do is he needs to tune a lot of things. So which makes the neural network gives the best result. So by tuning, what I mean is like he needs to say that okay, use these parameters to get the best result. So how you do that is like, for example, there is a bus driver, right? So he wants to go from point A to point B in a city. So he needs to take particular decisions: when to use clutch, when to use accelerator, and how much speed to go, when to brake, or when to change direction, where to go, what is the shortest route, all those things, right? So these are all the decisions that are taken by the bus driver. He guides the bus to go from one location to another location, right? So here it works in the same way as well. We guide the machine to give it the best results. So we guide it saying that use these decisions to actually make yourself better and give me the best accuracy. So we want something which works at like 95% accuracy or something like that, right? So to make it reach that point, there needs to be human who actually sits behind and does this hyperparameter tuning. So this is what is the job of a general data scientist or machine learning engineer is. We'll talk about more about what is a hyperparameter and how do you do this tuning as part of this class. But yeah, this is the agenda of today's class. Uh, can you share this in WhatsApp? I'll be sharing everything, all the content in WhatsApp. I think the presentation is shared by Bodhi Infinity to all of you in mail or something, I guess, the last session's presentation. But in case if they haven't shared, I'll be sharing last week's presentation and similarly this week's presentation as well. Yeah. Let's get started. The basic structure of a neural network is this. You have neurons, which are the circles that you can see in the figure, and you have the weights that are the connections between neurons. They determine the strength of the connection. So if uh, and a neuron is nothing but a node which can actually carry a value between 0 to 1. So these are the things we have discussed, and we know that there are different kinds of layers. So a neural network can have an input layer, an output layer, and a lot of hidden layers. So the input layer is determined by looking at the input. So if you are having a 28 cross 28 input, right, you will be having a 784 inputs. We know that, right? Why? How we determine that? We converted every pixel into a node by saying that every pixel contains a value between 0 to 1 and using it as an input. So if you are having an image of resolution 28 across 28, you will be having 784 input values. And the number of output nodes is determined by saying how many classes of output are present in your data. So we are dealing with MNIST data. In MNIST data, we saw that there are 10 classes possible. That's why we can have 10 output nodes. And the number of hidden nodes is the hyperparameter. So we have seen that hyperparameter tuning is the task of a machine learning engineer. So how you determine number of layers that needs to be present and number of nodes that needs to be present in every hidden layer is the task of a data science or a machine learning engineer. He needs to try out different experiments saying that, okay, which number of layers is giving the best results and how many number of nodes needs to be present in every layer. So this is done by a lot of trial and error. So people try out different things and see which one is giving the best results. Based on that, they try to use that one. So you can see here the number of hidden layers is not fixed. So it can be 1, 2, 3, so on till n. N can be any number. So, and also the number of nodes that are present in every layer, right? That is not fixed as well in the hidden layer. So it need not be same across all the hidden layers. So you can see that here it looks that all the hidden layers are supposed to have the same number of nodes, but that's not true. Actually, you can keep any number of nodes in a every hidden layer. So you can keep 5 nodes in first hidden layer, and similarly 7 nodes in second hidden layer, and 3 nodes in third hidden layer, and so on. So you can experiment this. You can experiment how many hidden layers to keep and the number of nodes that needs to be present in every hidden layer, and see which one is giving the best results. Based on that, try to use that. So this is the task of a machine learning engineer. In code, you will see that you can actually implement this using 2-3 lines of code. There you can change these values, and try out and see which one is giving the best results. Okay. So we'll talk about the computation part. How do you compute the value of a node? So we know that value of the input nodes is fixed. That is coming from the pixel value that is present in the network, right? So that is something we need not worry about. But we need to know how the values at the hidden layers are determined, right? So we have these nodes that are present in the neural network. Yeah, we have these nodes, the nodes in the hidden layer. We need to determine the values at those nodes as well. And we know that any node in a neural network can carry a value between 0 to 1. But how do you calculate that value? So that value actually depends on the values that are present in the previous layer, and similarly the weights that are actually used to connect the nodes from two layers. Both based on both these values, we actually determine what is the values that are present in the next layer. This is clear, right? How you actually determine the values in the next layer. So we'll see the formula how you do that. So say you have a node. I pick any node that is present in the neural network. Here, let's say I picked node, the first node that is present. So we know that since this is a fully connected neural network, it will be connected to every other node that is present in the previous layer. So it will have connections to all the n inputs. So you'll have n connections that are present, right? Because you are having n nodes, and every node is connected to this particular node. So we will have n connections. That means n weights. So this is the formula. So you take every input value that is present at the node, you multiply it with the weight that is connecting the node, and sum it across all the nodes. That value that you get together at this node, right? That will be the value sort of. So this is the formula sigma xiwi. You take the input from every node that is present in the previous layer, multiply it with the weight that is connecting the previous layer and the current layer, and sum it up. So the sum you will be getting, right, that should identify as the value that is that you will be getting at this node. So there are a few other things as well, but yeah, this is how you determine the value at a particular node. How do you determine the value at a particular node? You determine it by using both the inputs that are present in the previous layer and similarly the strength of the connections. That is the weights that are present between the previous layer and the current node. So you pick any node, you pick all the nodes that are present in the previous layer, and we know that the input layer values are fixed that we have got from the image. Once you have these values, you connect it, you multiply it by the weights that are present between this next layer node and the previous layer node. You sum it up, you get the value at the next layer. So we'll say, I mean, although the inputs at the previous layer are fixed, the weights are not fixed. We'll actually come to the part where we will say how these weights are determined. But at this point of time, just think that they are somehow already present. If you have both the weights that is present between both the layers already fixed, and similarly the inputs of the previous layer fixed, you can determine the value of the outputs at the next node, next layer node, right? Is this clear how we determine value of node in the hidden layer? Yeah. So I'll not talk about the activation now. I'll talk about the activation later. But yeah, I'll repeat it again. So yeah, if you feel something is not clear, right, just ask me to repeat, because this is the very basic fundamental, and without this, it will not be clear as we proceed in the course. So how you determine the value that is present at this node? I'm talking about the node where I place the cursor at, right? So how do you determine it? So I determine it by actually seeing what are the input values that are present in the previous layer. So I have n input nodes that are present, right? So these values are determined already. So once these values are determined, how do you, so can someone say like how these values are we getting at the input layer? How are we getting the values at the input layer? Where do we get these values from at the input layer? Say we have an image of 28 cross 28, right? Yeah. Yes. So yeah. So I'm not talking about the hidden layer. I'm talking about input layer. So in input layer, how do we get the values that are present in the input layer? Yes, exactly. So each pixel, you take every pixel that is present in the image and say that okay, every pixel is one neuron in my input layer. So I'm just covering it for those people who have not come previously. So if you have an image, is the screen not visible? I think the screen is visible, I guess, right? Okay, so Isaac seems like an issue with your system. Just maybe you can restart and connect back. So yeah, we have an image of input to 28 cross 28. So we saw that in image is nothing but a matrix of values. So if you pick any image, you click on right click on it, you will see the resolution of that image present. So in our data set, which is the MNIST data set, we know that the resolution of the input is going to be 28 cross 28. So we are going to use every pixel that is present in the image as an input for our neural network. So in our case, since the data set is of size 28 cross 28, right, we'll be having 784 input nodes. So that is how you determine the values at the input node. The value at the input node is nothing but the value at every pixel, right? So that is how you determine the values at the input node layer. So we are talking about images only as input now. If you are looking for some other kind of input, we need to discuss about it. But currently, we are only talking about images as input. We are talking about how do you classify an image in our MNIST use case. We are provided with only images of digits between 0 to 9, and we are trying to see what that digit is. So in our case, yeah, since we are only using image, we are providing it in that way. But in case if you feel like you want to provide some other kind of input, right, same way you can do. So if you are having a tabular data, you can see that how many features that are present in the table and use those many number of input nodes. So that way, based on the input, you can create the input layer. In our case, since it is an image, we are creating the input layer by taking every node as a every pixel value. Right. So once we know that these values are already present, just think that the weights that are connecting the input layer and the hidden layer are also already determined. Just think for now that they are already determined. So once we know what are the values that at the input layer, what are the values at the of the weights, we can actually determine what is the value of the next layer, hidden layer. So how you do that? Let's talk about determining the value of a particular hidden layer neuron. So I'm talking about how do you determine the value at this hidden layer neuron, that is the first hidden layer neuron, right? So how do you do that? You try to see what are the inputs that are getting connected to it. So we see that since it is a fully connected neural network, every input is connected to it. So we have all the n inputs connected to it, right? So we take the all the n inputs and multiply it with the weight that is connecting the both the neurons from previous layer and this layer. So every neuron that is present from the previous layer, right, it is connected to the hidden layer neuron using a weight. So we'll multiply the value of the input node with the weight for that connection, and we sum it across all the n input nodes. What the value you get, right, that would be the value of this hidden layer. Is this clear? Like how did we get the value at the hidden layer? Right? Yeah, as Ishwar has mentioned, this is how you actually get the value. H1 is equals to I1 into W1 plus I2 into W2 plus so on till IN into Wn. Yeah, so that is one restriction so far. So all the input images have to be of the same size. So everyone has to be only 28 cross 28 for this neural network. Yeah, and Ishwar has mentioned the formula, I guess. So yeah, hidden value at 1 is nothing but I1 into W1 plus I2 into W2 plus so on till IN into Wn, where I's are all the inputs nodes. So you have N input nodes, and W's are the connections between the input nodes and the hidden layer, H1, hidden node H1. So yeah, that is how you determine the value at the hidden layer. Is this clear? Great. So yeah, that is the formula. So you determine it in mathematics. You determine represent it in this way: sigma xi wi. So xi is the input, wi is the weight connections. So you multiply every input node with the corresponding weight connection, and once you have all these values, you sum it up. So sigma means that you are summing it up from input node 1 to n. So this is the same representation of what Ishwar has written in the chat. So it is just a concise representation of the same thing. So sigma xiwi means that you're summing it up with values between 1 to n. You are taking the multiplication of every input node with the corresponding weight connection and summing it up. That is how you are getting it. So this is the part, but apart from this, you also have another parameter called bias. We have not talked about it. So we have only talked about weights until so far, right? So there is another parameter called bias as well. So every node has a bias. So the input nodes doesn't have a bias, but every other node that is present, right? They have a bias value. So bias is nothing but a number. So it can be any value between minus infinity to plus infinity. So once you get the sigma xiwi, right, that we have determined by multiplying every input node with the corresponding weight, you to the entire thing you add a bias value. This you call it as the value at that node, right? So this bias is another parameter. Just think that it is also fixed at this point of time. We'll see how do you determine both these weights and bias later, but at this point of time, think that these weights and biases are somehow already present. So this is how you get the value between at a particular node. Also, we have seen that the output of a neuron is supposed to be between 0 to 1, right? But what happens is if you do this kind of a calculation, you will see that it might not come between a 0 to 1, but we would want to constrain it between 0 to 1. So how do we do that? We do that using something called as an activation function. So many of you have been asking like what is an activation function and all those things. So an activation function in our case is something which can constrain a output to a particular range. So it will not make it go above or below that range. So the most common activation function with fully connected neural network you will see is sigmoid activation function. So sigmoid, what it does is any value you give it, right, it will make it a value between 0 to 1. So how it does that? It does that using this formula. Sigma of x is equals to 1 by 1 plus e power minus x. So x can be anything. X can be any real number. Sigma of x will be 0 to 1. So it has that range between 0 to 1, right? So you give 3, minus 3, 70, 100, 1000, 10,000, minus 10,000. Anything you give, it will constrain it with between 0 to 1. It can convert it between 0 to 1. That is the task of an activation function. So whatever output that we are getting using this formula, right, sigma xiwi plus b, we pass it through an activation function so that it will actually constrain it between 0 to 1. Because we know that a neuron will contain a value between 0 to 1, right? So yeah, that is why we are passing it through an activation function. And we there is also another reason why activation function is required. But before that, is it clear like how we are computing the value at a particular node by using weights, bias, and activation function? Yes, so yes, you pass sigma xiwi plus bias through activation function. not only sigma xiwa, but you also add bias to that. Bias is present at every node, every hidden node. So every hidden node has a bias parameter. We add that value to the sigma xiwi, and once that value is there, you pass it through the activation function. The activation function will restrict it to a value between 0 to 1. So yeah, the bias is not same for all. Someone is asking, HP Deep is asking, is bias same for all? No, actually the bias is not same for all. It is a hyperparameter as well. So it will be different for every hidden node. So how do we decide which function to use? So there are some commonly used activation functions. So I have talked about sigmoid, but there are other activation functions as well. I'll talk about it. So I have not talked about it because the role of an activation function is not only to constrain between a particular range, but also to introduce nonlinearity, as Mani Vedva has asked about. So I'll talk about that. But before that, I just wanted to get an understanding that if you have understood how we are calculating the output at a particular node. Right? We are calculating it by doing sigma xiwa and adding a bias and passing it through an activation function. Right? Simple. Yeah. So bias is another parameter similar to weight. So we know that there are weights that are actually something that is present between every input node and the node in the next layer, right? So adding to that, there is something called as a bias parameter, which is present at every node. So every hidden node, you can say. So all these nodes that are present in the hidden layer, right? They will be having a particular parameter called bias that is learned as well. So just like how you learn weights, you learn bias as well. Yeah, just for now think that that is somehow present already, but we will see how we can learn both these weights and bias as part of our training next. So right now think that bias is a value that is present at every hidden node and it is already fixed, and it is not same across all hidden nodes. So it will be different across different hidden nodes. And why do we need bias? That is because it has a mathematical implication. So if you don't add bias, right, everyone knows this equation of y equals to mx plus c, I guess, right? This is the equation. So this is the equation of a linear line, right? So yeah, what we are trying to achieve is the same. So here x is the input, m is the weight kind of thing, and c is the bias parameter. So if you don't add c, right, every line has to go through origin, which is not always possible because we have seen that if you are using just a linear line to represent data, right, it is not always possible that you can get all entire kinds of representation, because say that your data is having representation of y equals to 2x plus 3, right? So if you don't have the bias parameter, you can never account for this plus 3 by changing any other parameter. So even if you change weights or something else, you can't account for this plus 3. So that's why we introduce this bias. So it has these implications from linear regression sort of. So you can think that bias is something which is necessary to make it fit to any kind of data. So that is the need for bias, and bias is present at every hidden node, which will be different across different hidden nodes. So now we'll talk about different kinds of activation functions. We have seen what is sigmoid. Sigmoid can constrict value between 0 to 1. We've also seen that neuron is supposed to carry a value between 0 to 1. That is just to like give an intuition of how a neuron looks like. But actually it need not carry a value between 0 to 1. When you are using sigmoid activation function, then only it will carry a value between 0 to 1. But if you use different other activation function, right, the value can change. So if you use sigmoid, the output activation, so neuron value lies between 0 to 1. But if you use tanh, it will lie between -1 to 1. Similarly, there are few other activation functions as well, ReLU, leaky ReLU, max out ALU, but you can forget about all these things. The most important activation functions are sigmoid, tanh, and ReLU. So sigmoid is, if you pass any function through sigmoid, it will constrain it between 0 to 1. If you pass any function through tanh, it will constrain it between -1 to 1. If you pass any function, any value to ReLU, what it does is, if it is less than 0, it will make it 0. If it is greater than 0, it will not change anything. So it is max of 0 to x, right? So what it does is, if the value is greater than 0, there is no change to the output. But if it is less than 0, it will make it 0. That is the ReLU activation function. So these are the different activation functions. So like I said, the output of the neuron need not be constrained between 0 to 1. Only when you are using sigmoid activation function, it happens that it needs to be constrained between 0 to 1. So there are different activation functions. All of them are actually introduced to do the major important thing of introducing nonlinearity into the task. The concept of nonlinearity is, you can think of it like the task of a neural network is to actually find an function between input and output, right? That is what a neural network does. You are giving an input, that is an image, and you are expecting an output. The output will be like a particular class, right? So this is the task of a neural network, to learn that function which can convert an image into an output. So the problem is, this kind of conversion is not linear. I mean, by linear, what I mean is like, if you don't capture nonlinear dependencies, you won't be able to get this. So by nonlinear, what I meant is like, to make it clear, probably what I will tell is, so linear means a straight line, nonlinear means a curve. You can think of like this. So the representation between input and output, right? It need not be a curve sort of. It need not be y equals to mx plus c. It can be actually something other than y equals to mx plus c. So what we are trying to do is, we are trying to find out this function f which can map input to output, right? Sorry. Yeah. We are trying to find out this function which can map input to output, input being our image and output being a particular class. We are trying to find out this function. But the problem is, it need not be that the relation between input and output is supposed to be linear. By linear, what I mean is like, it need not be like y equals to mx plus c. It can be equals to ax square plus bx plus c, x cube plus d e power x So it could be this kind of a complex relationship between input and output. Input, I mean, is again image, output is a class number. So if you are trying to find out what is the exact relationship, I mean, what is the function which maps input to output, right? Since we know that it need not be a linear line and it can be a complex function, we need to add this capability to our neural network. If we don't add this activation function, right, this kind of capability will not be present and we can only find linear dependencies. So it will only be useful in a particular kind of use case, but it will not be useful in a general use case. So what linearity does is, it adds more power to the neural network. Yeah, so ReLU is a nonlinear neural network as well. Sorry, nonlinear activation function as well, because linear means like there is only one line, but since you are having like two lines that are present in ReLU, right? So it is like a nonlinear function. By linearity, what you mean is only one line is present. There is only one line that is present, right? That is a linear function. But apart from one line, any other kind of thing that is present, it is non-linear. So why ReLU is good is like, it is kind of very easy to compute. you can see that the computation of sigmoid and tan h, right? They're actually compute intensive. So the computer will take some time to compute, but ReLU is just max function. It is very easy to compute. Yeah, so all these functions are nonlinear. So ReLU is nonlinear because it doesn't have one line, but it has two lines, and there is a discontinuity. So one line is coming, and suddenly it has changed, right? So that is why it's a nonlinear function. Is that clear why ReLU is a nonlinear function? Also, you can actually approximate any function with a ReLU sort of. But yeah, that would become a bit more complex. So let's not discuss that. But if you are having only one line, it means a linear function. If you are having anything like a curve or multiple lines that are present, it is a nonlinear function. And ReLU is the one which is mostly used because it is very easy to compute. And why we are using this nonlinear activation function? We are using this nonlinear activation function to give that power to the neural network so that it can actually find out what is the nonlinear mapping between input and output, because we see that the input and output may not be related in a linear way. It might be related in a nonlinear way. To figure out what nonlinear dependency is present between input and output, right? If you don't keep an activation function, you will not get that capability for the neural network. So yeah, someone is asking which activation function to use. Does it differ from problem to problem? So what happens is most of the use cases you will use ReLU. Very rarely you will use anything other than ReLU. So you can think that ReLU is the default activation function. In our thing, we are using sigmoid. Just to give a very simple example. So sigmoid is something which was present from a long time. So it was present from 1980 or something like that. But there were few problems with sigmoid. The network's difficulty. I mean, it was difficult to train the neural network with sigmoid. So ReLU came around some few years ago, maybe 780 years ago. And after ReLU came, they saw that training neural network became easier. Why is that? We'll talk about it later. But yeah, ReLU performs better than sigmoid. So people have switched from sigmoid to ReLU. But since we are still at the starting phase and trying to figure out how a simple neural network looks like, we are going to talk about sigmoid at this point. So yeah, we have to use a nonlinear function. If you use a linear function only, what happens is the relationship between output and input will only be linear. And if it is linear, it is possible that it might not actually give you the output that you are expecting. So to do that, you need to add nonlinearity into your neural network. Only then your neural network will become more capable. So yeah, there are other kinds of activation functions like you are saying that sign and step up. I haven't heard of these names, but it could be like some other name. But yeah, there are many other activation functions. I've just mentioned few which are popular here, but like there are tons of activation functions. People have tried out different activation functions to see if they are able to get some marginal improvement. So yeah, there would be a lot of activation functions, but these are the most popular ones: sigmoid, tan, h, and ReLU. So yeah, again, so why are we using activation function? Just to see if you have understood or not. Like, and people say, why are we using activation function? We saw that we are using activation function to constrain the value, but that is not the only case. Why are we using activation function? Yeah, so define the range of output is one scenario, but the main reason why we use an activation function is different. Yeah, we are enhancing the performance. So how are you enhancing the performance? By adding non-linearity. Please unmute yourself, everyone. Yes. Yeah, so we use a activation function to introduce nonlinearity. And why do we need nonlinearity? It makes the neural network more capable. It can be more, it can do more complex tasks. If you add only linearity, it is like Bruce Banner. But if you add non-linearity, it is like Hulk. So it can do a lot of things which is not possible by just being linear. That's why we introduce nonlinear. Just to introduce the curve, to do have a nonlinear, I mean, to find out what is the nonlinear dependency between input and output. But yeah, if anyone asks you in interview or anything, why do you actually need an activation function? Just to say that it is used to introduce nonlinearity. And why do we need nonlinearity? It is needed to capture complex dependencies between input and output, which are not possible by just having a linear dependence. Right? So yeah, there is another activation function called softmax as well, which is present at final layer. So the idea of softmax is to softmax is nothing but it is another activation function. We have talked about 3 activation functions so far, right? Sigmoid, tanh, and ReLU. Softmax is another activation function which is present only at the output layer. So you don't keep it at any other layer. You only keep it at output layer. The task of a softmax activation function is if it has values like this, right? 2, 1.1. So consider my neural network has only 3 outputs. And the outputs of the nodes that are coming from these are coming as 2, 1.1. The task of a softmax is use these values and convert it into probabilities, right? So what it does is it uses another function which converts it into probability like values, so that now it will actually give you the probability of it belonging to a particular class. So if you have 3 outputs, the softmax converts these outputs to probabilities. So 2 is converted to 0.7, 1 is converted to 0.2, 0.1 is converted to 0.1 after applying that function. So now it is saying that the neural network is saying that the output of the image that you have given is probably class 1 with 70% probability, class 2 with 20% probability, and class 3 with 10% probability. So that is the use of a softmax function. We use softmax function because we wanted to get probability like outputs at the end, because you can get values like this, but it doesn't actually give you very intuitive understanding of what your output represents. But if you have something like a probability, right, you can immediately understand, okay, so this says that it is probably belonging to class X with this probability. So that kind of intuitive understanding you are getting with probability, which is not possible with any other thing. So that's why we use a softmax function, and we use it only at the output layer, because we wanted to get probabilities of every class, saying that whenever you provide an input, right, we wanted to know what is the probability of that input being a particular class. So ideally, what we would want is we should be 100% probable that it belongs to a particular class and 0% probability of belonging to other classes, but it might not be possible. Yeah, so yes, someone is asking, is the sum of output probability is 1 for all input? Yes, softmax function task is to do that. It will make sure that sum of all the outputs will be 1, because it needs to look like a probability. And softmax function is the only function which actually works on multiple nodes at once. So whatever activation function we have seen, right, it only alters the value at a particular node, but softmax function takes the entire output layer and alters all of their values together, because it needs to give all the output values as probabilities with sum up to 1, right? So that's why it does that. And why we use the softmax function? We use it because we wanted to get probability like output, because it looks more nice to eye. Or if you get random numbers like 2, 1.1, right, it doesn't make any sense. I don't understand what it is. But if I get something like a probability saying that it is 70% probable that this particular digit is 2, and it is 20% probable that this particular digit is 5, and it is 10% probable that this particular digit is 9, I will be more happy. Okay, it is saying it is 70% confident that this digit is 2, so probability is 2. I can come into that decision from the output of the neural network. So that's why you convert it into probabilities. I hope this is clear, right? What is an activation function, different kinds of activation functions, and what is softmax of activation function. Great. So where do you use softmax and where do you use ReLU or similarly sigmoid? So I have mentioned that yeah, ReLU for hidden layers. Great. Yes, true. Softmax at output layer. True. So yeah, ReLU or sigmoid or any other kind of activation, you keep it hidden layer. At the output layer, you use softmax. Yeah, softmax is an activation function as well because it is also introducing a nonlinearity kind of thing. So softmax is an activation as well, but it is the activation that is present only at the output layer. You don't keep it at anywhere else. Great. So now we will come to the interesting part of how the neural network gets trained. So we have seen that these are all the components that are present and how we get output at every layer and how we determine the output of every hidden node. So just to add again, so we know that how to calculate the value at every hidden node, right? We calculate it by taking all the inputs that are present in the previous layer and multiplying with the weights, adding the bias and passing it through activation function. This way we are calculating what are the values that are present in a particular hidden layer. For every node we do that. Once we get all the values that are present in this hidden layer, we go on and do calculate the values for the next hidden layer and we go on until we reach output and at output you apply softmax, you get probabilities. This is the entire flow of the neural network from input to output. How do you get output values? Using the input values. It goes from layer to layer and you finally release the output layer. So this is the entire process. This entire process is called feed forward propagation. It is called feed forward because you are feeding the input in a forward manner from left to right. That's why it's feed forward propagation. We are propagating from left to right by feeding the inputs from the left and going forward. So that is called feed forward propagation. So someone is asking, are there any activation function for output also, like we have for hidden layer? So yeah, as you have said, for output there is only one activation function you'll use, which is softmax. For hidden layer, you can use any other kind of activation function. You can use ReLU, sigmoid, 10H, anything, but for output, you only use softmax. But why for output, we only use softmax and not anything else? Can someone say why we use only softmax at output layer? Yeah, we need probability values. That's why we use softmax in the output layer. Great. So yeah, is this clear? Like how we are propagating from the input layer to the output layer using both all the weights, biases, and how are we calculating the values at every layer and forward propagating? How about others? Is it clear like how we are able to calculate values at every hidden node and using those to go from one layer to another layer till we reach the final layer, right? Yeah, great. So now we have come to the hidden output layer. We have got some value using all the inputs. Now the thing is, we need to see whether it is coming correctly or not. So what happens is initially we have some values that are present for all the weights and biases. Using this, we calculated the values and we have done a feed forward propagation to reach the output layer. At the output, we have got some outputs. But what we have seen is the outputs that are coming at the output layer are horribly wrong. We are expecting it to be something, but it came completely different. So what happens at this point of time? We need to tell the neural network, you are not doing well. You are actually performing very badly. You need to correct yourself. You need to change the hyperparameters. The hyperparameters in this case being, you need to change your weight values and bias values in a little bit so that you need to give better results. So to give an example, say you are expecting an output like this. You are expecting that 2 will be having 1.0. I mean, then neural network will give you output 2 when you are passing an image of input 2, right? You expect that output node 2 will be activated, so it will be giving 100% probability here and 0% probability for the rest. This is the expected one. But what you have got is this. It is saying that okay, these values are not passed through softmax, that's why it is looking like this. But if you pass through softmax, you will be getting probabilities. But yeah, it is giving values like this. It's giving these values mean that 2 is not highlighted. Some random things are coming. Random values are highlighted, sort of, right? You can see that 3 and 6 are more highlighted than 2. So this is not the kind of output we are expecting. But this is the output we got by doing the feed forward propagation. So what we need to do? So we need to tell the neural network you have done very badly. So based on this, it will try to correct itself. This is the process of learning, just like how a student learns or a human learns. So I have given an exam and I have got very bad marks. So based on that, the teacher will give me feedback. You have done these things very badly. So you try to figure out yourself and try to perform better in the next exam. So same way we are trying to tell the neural network you have done very badly for this particular task of classifying 2 as 2. So you need to change your approach the next time so that you will perform better. So what it will do is it will try to change all these weights and biases in some way so that it will try to give the better results next time. This is a process of learning all the weights and biases. So what you do is at the start of the neural network training, you give random values to all these weights and biases. You give it a value between some -1 to 1, some random value, and you try to figure out what is the output. Once you got the output, you try to say that neural network, okay, you have not done correctly, try to change this weights in some way, so that you will perform better. So we'll talk about how it can change these weights, but this is the entire process of learning. How it learns is, it tries to pass an image as an input from input, try to get the output, see what is the output that it is giving, what is the output it is supposed to give, and then we will inform the network that you have not done properly. You are supposed to give 2, but you have given random outputs. Then it will try to figure out and try to change the weights. So this is the process of learning. So this is initiated by something called as cost function. So there is a cost function in this case called cross entropy, but what a cost function does is it says that it actually quantifies how much the output is different from the expected output. So I have got this particular output from the neural network, right? It activated a few values like 3 and 6, and it has not activated node 2, which is supposed to be activated. So it will give a quantitative estimation of how much it is wrong. Based on that, the neural network will try to figure out. So the cost function task is that it will try to say how much there is the error in the prediction. It will give that error to the neural network, saying that, okay, you have gone wrong by this much, so you need to correct. So if it has gone wrong by too much, right, it will give a high error. If it has gone wrong by a little bit, it will give a less error. So say instead of like giving 1 for 2 and 0 for everything, so say it has given 0.9 for 2 and the rest of all the nodes combined is giving 10%, then the error should be less, right? Because it is giving with 90% probability that it is 2 and with 10% probability that it belongs to the other digits. That is kind of fine. But if it says that it is 20% probable that it is digit 2, but some other 80% probable that it belongs to any other digit, then it means that it is actually performing badly. So you need to give a higher error, saying that you have performed bad, so you need to correct more. So why do we need to give this kind of a direction? So that it will know, okay, whether it is going in the right direction or not. So whenever it changes weights, right, it will give a new output. Whenever it gives a new output, we say that, okay, beta, you have done well or you have not done well. So if it has improved over the last time, we say that we give a less error, saying that, okay, you have improved, so you can try to improve even more. But if it has performed better, worse than the previous time, we try to give a more error, saying that no, you are not improving, you are actually deteriorating. So don't go in the direction you are going, try to change the direction, try to go for a different approach and see if it works. So this is how you train the neural network. And the task of this cost function or the loss function is to determine how much the output of the neural network is off from the expected output, right? Is this clear what a cost function is or a loss function is? Yeah, so there are different loss functions. So in this case, we will be using, in classification case, we'll be using a loss function called cross entropy. So it has a formula particularly. We are not going to talk about the formula, but you can think of it like it is used for a classification task. It will actually look at the outputs that came out and what is the output that is supposed to come, and it will try to figure out this is the loss. It will give that loss to the neural network based on the neural loss that is given by the loss function. The neural network tries to figure out itself and become better the next time. This is a task of a cost function. So there are many other cost function as well. There is something like a mean square error as well. Mean square error is very simple. It will take every output and compare it with the expected output. So say if you are having 3 outputs here, right? In this case, so in this case you have 3 outputs, and these are the expected outputs. You take a difference between the output that is coming and the expected output, and you take sum of squares error. You might have heard about this. So say you have x1, x2, x3, and predicted value, expected value are y1, y2, y3, right? So the error is nothing but x1 minus x2 whole square plus x1 minus y1 whole square plus x2 minus y2 whole square plus x3 minus y3 whole square. So that is the sum of mean square error. Yeah, RMSE or MSE, both of them kind of do the same thing. So I'm just writing down the formula. So this is the formula, x1 minus y1 whole square plus x2 minus y2 whole square plus x3 minus y2 whole square. So this is the squared error. If you divide it by 3, what you will get is the mean squared error, because we have 3 points here, right? So that is how you determine the mean square error loss. Cross entropy loss is another loss which is very famous for classification. So the formula is a little bit complex, but it does the same thing. It tries to tell you how much your output is off from the expected output. So one hot vector is like say your output is supposed to be like a one hot vector we need when you want to convert it into say in our use case, right? You're supposed to tell what is the digit. So in our case, we need to output a value between 0 to 9, right? But we don't, the network doesn't directly give you value like 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 or something like that, right? It doesn't give a real number saying that, okay, the output is 0 or it is 1 or something like that. Instead of that, what we'll have is like we'll have 10 nodes and only one of those nodes will be highlighted, activated, right? So that is how our network works. Yeah, so that is the difference between one hot or normal label. So normal label will be like it will be a value between 0 to 9. One hot will be like 0, 1. I mean, it is the binary representation, you can say. Yeah, so currently what we are having at the output layer is almost like a one hot output we are expecting. Yeah, so say we wanted to give an output 1, right? We don't directly, the network doesn't directly say that, okay, output is 1. Instead of that one, it will give an output like this. We have 10 nodes, it will give 10 outputs. So this is the difference between normal label and a one hot encoded label. So one hot encoding is nothing but converting it into that kind of a vectorization. So yeah, again, yeah, ignore that part. But anyway, what we have seen that the task of the loss function is to like determine how much the difference between the predicted output and the expected output. So there are different loss functions which do this. We have talked about mean square error. Just like that, in classification, mostly you will use something like a cross entropy loss. Using this loss, we try to change these weights and biases. So how that happens is using the process called gradient descent. So what we are trying to achieve is we are trying to achieve a particular set of weights. such that it gives you the best result, right? This is the task of training a neural network. When you train a neural network, what you're trying to do is you're trying to change all the weights and biases in such a way that you'll be getting the best result. By best result, I mean like 100% accuracy, if that is possible. If it's not possible, maybe 99% accuracy. With 99% accuracy, whatever input I provide, it should give me the correct result. That is the task I'm trying to do. So to be that accurate, right, we need to have the ideal set of weights and biases. But when we started out, we just took some random weights and biases. So how do we reach the point where we get the best weights and biases? That we do by changing the weights and biases slowly. So how do you do that? You use a process called gradient descent, and you try to change the weights and biases in such a way that you go to the best point. The best point is called something called as global minima. Global minima means you are having the global least error. Why it is called minima? Because we are trying to achieve least amount of error that is present. Yeah. So point where the loss is minimum. So we are trying to go to a point where we are having the least amount of error or loss, right? So that is the global minima. We are trying to go to that point. So to reach that point, we need to change our weights in such a way that we will be able to go to that point. So what we do is we start at a point like this. So say that, I mean, this is the loss curve, sort of. So loss actually can change, can improve or decrease, right? Whenever you are changing the weights, that is what you are doing as part of the training. You are trying to change the weights and trying to see if the loss is increasing or not, loss or error is increasing or not. So you start at one loss, you try to always try to reduce that loss. So say if you have started at the point where my cursor is there, right? So I try to see, to nudge the weights in some direction to see if my loss is improving or decreasing. So if I came in this direction, right, my loss is decreasing. But if I'm going in this direction, my loss is increasing. So you try to see based on that. So if you are changing the weights and if your loss is increasing, yeah, like in this graph of going up, you don't go in that direction. But if your loss is decreasing, you try to go in that direction. So that is what we do. So the loss curve looks like this. You start from one point, you try to change the weights and biases in such a way that you go to a better point. So your loss will be slowly decreasing. And your task is to come to the best point. So the best point will be this. This is the place where we want to settle. But what happens is, you can think of it like we are having a ball which you have dropped at this mountain. So you can think of it like a mountain. Our loss function is like a mountain. We wanted to reach the lowest point of mountain. And we are trying to do that by dropping a ball at a particular point. So we are dropping a ball at this point and we are trying to reach this lowest point. But what happens is there could be something called as local minima. A local minima is something where nearby surroundings, it is the best, but it is not the best when you compare it to the overall scenario. So you can see that this point, right, it is best compared to the left or it is best compared to the right, but it is not best compared in the overall scenario. So it is possible that it can get stuck there, but that is how gradient descent works. You start from somewhere, you try to move and try to go to a minimum. So that minima can be so yeah, deep learning is nothing but trying different techniques are all possible to reach the global minimum. But what happens is you can get stuck in local minimum. Is this clear? What is the loss curve and how is it actually clear? Related to, how do you reduce the loss? If something is not clear, just ping. We can actually have a discussion again because this is something again which is very important. So what we are doing as part of gradient descent is we are trying to move the loss in such a way that we try to reach the global minima. Global minima is the point where the loss is the least. But what happens is as the loss decreases, right, it is possible that it can get stuck in something called as local minima. Local minima is the place where the loss is less compared to its surroundings, but it is not the least in the entire arena. So it might be possible that we might get stuck in local minima. So this is something like, just imagine we are dropping a ball. So if you drop a ball, right, it will come down with the slope and it can actually get stuck in this because it is a minima compared to the left or right, right? But and it might not actually travel and go here. But ideally, we would want to go there. So what happens is, if you whenever you are starting with different kinds of random initialization, right? Sometimes you can start from here, sometimes you can start from here, sometimes you can start from here. So this kind of thing happens. So every time you end up at different position in the training. So if you are lucky, you will reach the global minima. If you are not lucky, you might actually get stuck in local minima. But that is still fine, because local minima is better than being at the point where we are present. So it will be like, if local minima is giving you 95% accuracy rate, global minima will be giving you 99% accuracy. And the point where you started, it will be 0% accuracy. So this is a demonstration in the 2D space. What I have shown in this is in the 1D space. So you can see you have a weight and bias. These parameters are getting updated, and when these parameters are getting updated, this ball is coming from, I mean, you're starting from a point and it is getting settling at a minima. So the minima that it is finding around, right? So that is how you do that. You try to change the weights and biases in such a way that, yeah, so gradient descent actually tells you which direction to go using the loss function. So there is some calculus involved. So we are not talking about the calculus, but what gradient descent does is, it looks at the loss, it figures out, okay, where do I change my weights? So should I increase them or decrease them? How do I do that? That is given by gradient descent. Gradient descent is a mathematical equation which will tell you, should I increase my weights or decrease my weights? Which direction should I go? So when you are having a ball here, right, should I go left or right? Should I go left or right? Can someone tell? I'm having a ball here. Should I go left or should I go right? Yeah, so we should be going left, because we will be going to a better minima, right? So that is what gradient descent does as well. It will look at your position and it will say that you need to go in a particular direction. By going in a particular direction, what we mean is changing the weights. How do we change the weights? Should we increase it or decrease it? How do you do that? That is determined by gradient descent. So gradient descent is the algorithm which will figure it out. But the task is to reduce the loss function, so that by changing the task of the gradient descent is to change the weights and biases in particular direction, so that we'll reach a better error. So we'll be getting the least error that is possible. So gradient descent is trying to help the neural network learn by changing the parameters. So this is how we do. So we start with some random weights, then we use the gradient descent to change the weights in some direction, so that the loss decreases. So until it comes to a better point. Is changing weights related to activation? Yeah, we'll see that actually if you change weights, the activation values also will get changed, because we know that, right? When the value at a particular neuron is dependent upon the weights that are connected previously. So if you change weights, the value at a neuron changes as well. And similarly, if the value at a neuron changes, the output activation also changes. So this is a learning process. The neural network, over a lot of iterations, it learns. So you can see here, right? So it is across 100 iterations, it has changed. Initially, it is randomly set with weight equals to 1 and bias equals to 0. But over 100 iterations, it has figured out that it is not the right value. I need to go at actually weight equals to minus 0.47 and bias equals to some 0.13, I guess. So how did it figure this out? It figured this out by doing that gradient descent. Is this clear what gradient descent is and why do we use it? Yeah, so this is a 1D example. So you start at an initial weight, you try to go in the direction where the loss decreases until and unless you reach a global minimum. Once you reach the global minimum, you stop the training. Now you are already at the best position. So you can't improve better than this, so you don't change anything. So you stop the training and say that, okay, my model training is completed. So again, I'll share another video which gives you even more intuitions about how gradient descent works. You can go through that. I'll be sharing it in the WhatsApp group. So yeah, please everyone get onto that WhatsApp group. I'll be sharing a lot of content over there, and also On top of that one, try to get involved in the discussions, because that will help everyone, right? Yeah, so we have discussed that gradient descent is the algorithm which will actually tell you direction of changing weights, so that your loss function decreases. But back propagation is an algorithm. Okay, I will be sharing all the previous messages in the group as well. Similarly, yeah, uh, if you are added in the wrong WhatsApp group, try to ping Somu, I guess, Somu Barba. He will be able to help you. So what is the difference between neuron and perceptron? Neuron is a node in a neural network. Perceptron is a very simple neural network. So it will have only two nodes, I guess. That is the difference between neuron and perceptron. Perceptron is the most simple neural network that you can use for doing a very simple task of modeling a gate. By gate, I mean, like you might have seen in AND gate, NOR gate, NAND gate, right? To model that function, you can actually use a single layer neural network. If only one layer is there, it is called perceptron. Perceptron, you can think of it like a very simple neural network. So only one layer is there. Neuron is the building block of a neural network. Every node in a neural network is called a neuron. Perceptron will have multiple neurons, but it will have only one layer. Okay, great. So if you are added in the wrong WhatsApp group, try to get in contact with Code Infinity. They will be adding you. Or otherwise, I have shared the WhatsApp group link in this chat as well. You can get joined. Great. So now we'll talk about back propagation. Back propagation is the way you actually change the weights. We have talked that we actually change the weights in some ways, as that uh, you start getting lesser error. But how do you change the weights? How do you methodologically change the weights so that you start performing better every iteration? So that is the algorithm of back propagation. So we have seen what is feed forward propagation, right? What is feed forward propagation? Before going into back propagation, can someone say what is feed forward propagation? Yes, right. So most of your answers are correct. So if you're going from input to hidden layers to output by doing calculation from left to right, that is called feed forward propagation. Yes, yes. So everyone is right. Calculating the output based on the input from the previous layer and going across from one layer to other layer until you reach the output. This is called feed forward propagation. Back propagation is almost the reverse of that. Once you have calculated the output, right, you know what is the error using the loss function. Once you got the error, what back propagation does is it will try to change the weights that are present in the final most layer. Once those are changed, based on this, it will try to change the weights that are present in the previous layer, and it goes until it reaches the input. So it goes on changing all the weights in a layer by layer manner from output to beginning, from back to front, in a methodological I mean in a like serial manner. So that is why it's called back propagation. Feed forward propagation, you are going from left to right. Back propagation, you go from right to left. In feed forward propagation, you are calculating the output. In back propagation, what you are doing is based on the output, you are trying to find out what is the error. Using the error, you are trying to change all the weights. You start from the final layer and you try to go until the input layer, changing all the weights that are present in between, layer by layer. This is the back propagation, right? Yeah, so back propagation always needs the error. Without error, it can't actually change the weights because it has no intuition whether it is going in the right direction or not, right? So we have seen previously, like we give based on the loss function how much wrong the output is. So based on that, it will try to change those weights. So that's why back propagation needs the error always. So these are again, these are all from a particular video from 3 Blue 1 Brown. I'll share that video also. So that will give you a very good understanding of how back propagation works. But I'll just give a very brief of what back propagation works in this. So this is the output we want, and this is the output we got. sorry. Yeah, this is the output we want, and this is the output we got. We saw that 2 is not activated and some other neurons are activated. So what we do is we try to see what are all the neurons that are connected to node 2. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to increase the value of how we know where is the error. So we know how the error is present by finding out the loss function, right? We know loss function. The task of the loss function is to tell like how much is the error. So you use loss function to determine the how much your output is differing from the expected output. So loss function task is to do that. You use a loss function to give you what is the error. So there are different loss functions. We saw what is mean square error. Yeah, so that is a very basic understanding of like error, but yeah, you do some calculation on top of that one to get what is the loss. So in mean square error, it is desired minus actual square. So code, we haven't gone into coding yet. Tomorrow we'll be covering the coding part. I mean, not tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow only, I guess. So we'll see how to model a neural network tomorrow. So currently we are at the theory part, but yeah, to just give a very basic understanding of how error looks like, what Rahul has mentioned is the thing. So that is the very basic difference of the error, but you don't do that. What you do is you do mean square error. It would be something like sum of desired minus actual square. So this is like a error function. So this is the mean square error function. So you take the output of every node that is present and the expected output, take the difference between them and sum it across all the nodes by squaring them. And once you get the value, divide it by the number of nodes is n. So this is the mean square error. So this is one loss function. Like this, many other loss functions are there as well. So this is a very intuitive loss function. So it is saying that I'll try to see what is the difference between the expected and output, and I will square it and sum it up. Why do we square it? We square it because we don't want positive and negative to cancel out. If you square, everything will come out positive, right? That's why we square it. So loss function, error, all these are clear, I guess, right? So yeah, in this case, you are expecting 2 to be 1 and rest all to be 0, but it is not like that. Here, many other things are like highlighted and 2 is not highlighted. So what we need to do is we need to increase the value of 2 and need to decrease the value of others, right? This is how you are supposed to proceed. That is what we want from the neural network. So what we can do, we can increase the value of 2 by changing the values of weights, or you can change the values of nodes. So we'll see how you can actually change that. So we know that value of 2 is determined by sigma wi xi, right? This is the way you calculate the output at a particular node, if you remember, right? So how do you improve the value of 0.2? So there are 3 ways you can improve the value. You can increase the bias. So if you increase the bias, the overall value increases, and overall value increases, the output becomes closer to 1. So sigmoid or tan h and all those things, right? These are monotonous functions. So if you increase the value, the activation value also increases. So if you increase bias, the total sum increases, or instead of that one, what you can do is you can increase the weights also, or you can increase the outputs of the previous nodes. So by doing either of these 3, you can improve the value at 0.2, right? This is how you try to improve the value at 0.2. So this is what we are doing for node 0.2. But similarly for other nodes also, you want to do similar. For other nodes, you want to push them to 0. So what you do is like you try to decrease any of these values. You either decrease the weight, or you decrease the activation, or decrease the bias, so that other values goes close to 0. That is what you do for other nodes, right? So any node, you see what is the thing you want to achieve. So for this node, we want to make it higher. So if you want to make it higher, you can improve the weights that are connected to the node, or you can improve the bias, or you can actually improve the activations of the nodes that are connected to the neuron. So in these three ways, we can increase the value. Decreasing will be the reverse. You can decrease any of these three things to decrease the value. Also, there is this thing. So whenever you decrease a weight, right, it decreases in the way the activation value it gets multiplied by. So we know that these are the activation values that are present in the previous node, right? Activation values is nothing but the node values. The node values we multiply it with the weights and add bias to get the output. So what happens is if you change a particular weight, right? Say I'm changing weight W0 and it is connected to node A0. So if A0 value is very high, if I change W0 even slightly, there would be a rapid change in the output at 0.2, right? That is because A0 is high, and if you change W0 a little bit, so the overall change is high. But in case, say, if A1 is very less, even if I change W1 a lot, it doesn't affect it a lot. So that's why neurons which are actually highlighted a lot will have more impact in changing the output at the next layer rather than neurons which are very deep, right? So that is what like figures out which neurons to uh, activate. So this is the concept we have seen previously, like neurons which get activated will go on and further activate other neurons. That is because those are the things which have values, and those are the things which can actually multiply and give a significant value to the output node. That's why only the highlighted neurons will have more impact compared to the nodes which are dim. Here, if it is bright, it means that the value is closer to 1. If it is dim, it means that value is closer to 0. Right? So if the value is closer to 1, the weight corresponding to it, even if you change it a little bit, the output 0.1, 0.2 gets impacted a lot. But the ones which are dim, right? Even if you change their weights a lot, it might not impact a lot because you're multiplying it with a value which is close to 0. So it will be close to 0. So that is how it works. It is similarly, it works in the opposite way as well. So if you are trying to change an activation, right, someone which is having a higher weight, that will have more impact. So if you are changing an activation and it is connected through a higher weight, right, I mean there is a strong connection between the nodes. So even if you change the activation value a little bit, it will result in a higher significant change in the output. What I'm trying to say is like both the weights and inputs are highly correlated. So if the input is more, if you change the weight a little bit, it will impact a lot. Similarly, if the weight is more, if you change the input a little bit, it will get impacted more. So weights are updated as part of the training process. So that is what we are doing here, right? As part of the gradient descent and backpropagation, we are updating the weights. This is the entire training going. So how is it getting updated? It is getting updated by getting the signal from the node. So in this case, we are saying that we wanted to increase 2. So what it does is, for node 2, we wanted to increase it from 0.2 to 1, right? That is what our expectation is. So what we try to do is we try to change one of these weights randomly and see which one is giving better results. If it is giving better results, we try to go in that direction. So that is what happens. That is the training process. Is this clear, Rahul? How these weights are updated? These weights are updated based on the requirement. So there is a requirement of improving this, right? If there is a requirement of improving this, we try to improve some weights that is present from the previous year. And what about those numbers which already had a probability of 1? So if a number is having a value of 1, right, you want to decrease it and make it 0 because that is not correct. At the output layer, only the correct output node is supposed to have probability 1, others are supposed to have probability 0. So if they are having the wrong probability, we try to reduce the weights or reduce the activations or reduce the bias so that their value comes down. Right? Is that clear, Jashandeep? So only the right ones are supposed to get activated, and only the right node is supposed to get activated in the output layer. All the other nodes are supposed to be deactivated. So if they are activated, we try to reduce the weights corresponding to that. If they are not if that then is fine. But the one which is supposed to be activated, if it's not activated, we try to change the weight such that it gets activated. This is the entire process of training. So we have seen only the final layer. So again, once we know what are the things that needs to be done, right, we go to the previous layer as well. So we know that okay, we might need to improve the activation. So if you want to improve the activation of a particular node, so that this will improve the next layer, right? So say we are trying to improve the output of second node, we need to improve some of the activations that are present in the previous layer. How do we improve the activation that is present in the previous layer? Similar to what we have done for this node. We are trying to improve the activation for this output node based on previous nodes, right? So if you are trying to improve the activation of the previous node, you need to look at the nodes that are connected to it from the in the previous layer and try to change those. Either the weights or bias or similar how we have done this for this node, we do it for the nodes that are present in the previous layer and try to improve those values. And if you change the previous layer weights or bias or similarly previous layer activations, it will try reflect with a change in activation values for this. So the thing we can directly change are the weights and biases. You don't directly change. Yeah, so I think this got wrongly interpreted. So you don't change the weights and biases only in the final layer. You change it across. So how you do this? You start from the final layer. You try to change all the weights, and similarly you try to improve the activations. So we know that we can actually affect a output of a node by either changing the bias, or you can change the weight, or you can change the activation. But how can you change activation? You have no control over the activation directly. You can change an activation only if you can change the weights that are present in the previous layer, right? So if I want to change the activation of a particular hidden layer node, right, I need to see what are all the weights that are present in the previous layer and what are the activations that are present in the previous layer, and similarly its own bias. It's like repeating for the previous layer, like what we have done for the second node, right? We are going to do the same thing for all the nodes that are present in the previous layer and change the weights and all those things that are present for the connection between previous and second previous layer. And this way you're back propagating. You're starting from final layer and going from final layer to the front layer. This is the back propagation process. You start from final layer, you try to see what are the things you need to change. Once you figure out what are the things you change, you try to change that. And we know that we can change the weights and biases directly, but we can't change the activations directly. So how do you impact the activations? You impact the activations by changing the weights and biases in the even more previous layer. That is the second previous layer. You change the weights and bias in the second previous layer, you can impact the activation in this previous layer. Is this clear? How you are actually changing the entire thing by going from layer to layer? We change it across. We start from final layer, but we directly go from one layer to another layer. From end to the input layer. So we change weights and bias activation in each layer, but by how much? So, but by how much is determined by how much error you have. So if you have a higher error, you will be changing it a lot. If you have a low error, you will be changing it less. So the loss function is the one which determines how much you need to change these weights and bias and activation, right? So yeah, for every node that is present, right? So it gets a direction from every node in the output layer saying that for node 2, you need to improve. For node 3, you need to deprove or something like that. So you'll be getting some 10 directions. You'll take the cumulative sum of all these 10 directions and you try to change it. So that way you improve the neural network. That is how you train the neural network. So it will be even more clear if you see the video that I have mentioned. It has a very clear and 15 minutes video on how backpropagation works. So I'll be sharing that video, but this is how you do. You start from final layer, you go to all the previous layers one by one until you reach the input layer. By this time, you have trained it for one iteration. You do it for multiple iterations until your loss reaches a global minimum, right? So this is the entire process of backpropagation. I hope this part is clear. Great. If you have any doubts, please ask. The backpropagation part. So we have not got into the mathematics because that is something which you can learn, but that is something which is not asked kind of in interviews. That is just for your own personal understanding. If you are interested, you can actually look into the multivariate calculus that is required for this. But we have just gone into the intuition part, how this backpropagation works. Are there any doubts as such for backpropagation, gradient descent, and all the things that we have discussed so far? So is this clear now? How we train the neural network, how we train the weights and biases so far? Great. So awesome. So right. Great. Yeah. So we have seen that how do we do backpropagation when you pass a single input image, but well, the problem is like you can't go on passing single input image, find out what is the error and change it every time. It will be very slow, right? Instead of that one, what you can do is you can pass a batch of images. So I'll say in our data set 60,000 images are there, right? I'll pick 100 images, pass through the network, find out what is the total error for all these 100 images, and do backpropagation on that one instead of like doing backpropagation on every single image, right? So this is called as mini batch gradient descent. So what we have seen previously, right? If you pass only single image and find out what is the error and change weights based on that, that is called as stochastic gradient descent. Stochastic gradient descent is when you are passing only one input, finding out the error and changing the weights. So mini batch gradient descent is when you are passing a batch of images and trying to find out what is the error for that batch, and using that error to calculate the weights and biases. So that is called as mini batch gradient descent. And there is another called as batch gradient descent. In batch gradient descent, what you do is you pass the entire data set of your images through the network, find out what is the total error, and change all the weights at once instead of like doing it for a particular image or doing it for a batch of images. That is called as batch gradient descent. These are the three kinds of gradient descents that are generally there. So everyone has its own problems and advantages, but most of the time you will be using something called as mini batch gradient descent. That means like you will be using a batch of images instead of like going for the entire data set of images or going for every single image. Why we do that? Because if you go for a single image every time, right, you will have see that your weights change a lot, because for every image you are getting some random direction that you need to go in this direction, go in this direction. So you will be stuttering a lot. You will not go in the expected path. Sometimes your error will increase, sometimes your error will decrease. So that kind of thing will happen if you are passing only one image every time and finding out error and changing the weights every time. So that is why stochastic gradient descent behaves like a drunk person. So instead of like going to his home directly, he will go in one direction and then another direction, and finally somehow hopefully he will reach the home. So the stochastic gradient descent behaves like that. So we don't want to do that. Batch gradient descent is like a very good student. You are taking the total error and trying to find out what is the way you need to go. So batch gradient descent is the ideal thing we want to have. But the problem with batch gradient descent is you need to pass all the images at once. And you know that a computer might not be able to process all the images at once. So in that case, that's why you will not go for something like a batch gradient descent. So to make a trade-off between batch gradient descent and stochastic gradient descent, we go for something like as mini batch gradient descent. In mini batch gradient descent, what you do is you don't take the entire data set of images, but you take a batch of images and find out what is the error for that batch and try to use that. Yeah, so someone is asking what is stochastic gradient descent. So stochastic gradient descent is when you are passing a single image and finding out what is the error and changing the weights and biases based on that. I mean, if you have 60,000 images, right, what you do is you pass one image one by one. So you'll be passing 60,000 images one by one. So you'll be having 60,000 computations, which is very slow. And because of that, what happens is whenever you pass a new image every time, right, it will say that, okay, change your weights in this way. And you pass another image, it will say change the weights in the opposite way. So it will behave like a drunk person. Sometimes it will go properly, sometimes it will go randomly. So it will take more time for the network to stabilize. So that is stochastic gradient descent. When you are passing every image individually, right? Is this clear? What is stochastic gradient descent? Batch gradient descent is when you are passing all the images at once. So you know what is the right direction to go. So it will behave like a very good student and it will go in the right direction and it will reach home. But the problem with that is like it is very compute heavy and computers cannot handle a lot of images. So say if I am having 1 million images as a data set, right? I can't load 1 million images into memory. So it is not possible. That's why you don't prefer batch gradient descent. You prefer something like as mini batch gradient descent. Instead of taking all the 1 million images at once, I'll take 100 images at once. So it is better than taking one image every time. So it is better than one image every time, and it is better than 1 million images because I can't load 1 million images into memory, but I can load 100 images into memory. So that is why we go for something like a mini batch gradient descent. So you can see in this graph how stochastic gradient descent, mini batch gradient descent, and batch gradient descent behaves. So batch gradient descent is the blue one. It goes directly to the global minima. So it knows the straight path. It will go like that. Right? This is the batch gradient descent. Ideally, we would want that, but it is not possible due to the limitations. But then stochastic gradient descent, you see, it is going round and round and round, and it is sometimes going forward, sometimes it's going backward, but still somehow it is able to reach. But it takes a lot of time to reach. There is a problem with stochastic gradient descent. Batch gradient descent is the trade-off between these two. So although it might get a little bit way off sometimes here and there, but it is much better than stochastic gradient descent, and it reaches much faster than stochastic gradient descent, and also it is not computationally impossible to load a batch of images. So this is the difference between stochastic gradient descent, mini batch gradient descent, and batch gradient descent. Is this clear? Great. So we'll be using mini batch gradient descent in general because of the reasons that I have mentioned. So there is another hyperparameter which the person has to tune. So hyperparameter is the learning rate. Learning rate determines how fast you are moving. So if you are using a low learning rate, you are actually going slow. If you are using a higher learning rate, you are going at a faster pace. So learning rate is kind of similar to the pace. So say you are actually dropping a ball, right? So if you are taking bigger steps, uh, like by dropping a ball, what I meant is this is a loss curve that we have seen before, right? Where we want to reach the global minima. So we are starting at one point, we are trying to reach the global minima. So if you are taking bigger steps every time, you will reach it fast. If you take very small steps, you will take a lot of time to reach. But if you are taking very huge steps, right, you might actually overshoot and might not reach the global minima at all. So this is something again a human needs to tune as well. Learning rate gives you an idea of how much fast you need to train. Am I training too fast or am I training too slow? If you are training too slow, it will take a lot of time, so it will be wasting your computer and similarly your time. If you are training too fast, what happens is it might overshoot and it might not stabilize at all. But if you are training it optimally, it will reach the optimal uh, learning point. Yeah, so it is used in gradient descent. It is actually saying how much fast your gradient descent should go. Learning rate specifies that how much speed you need to go in the gradient descent. So yeah, I think we are reaching the end of the session. There are a few more things we can cover, but I think we already had a lot of discussion today. So we'll stop here right now. We'll be opening for Q&A. So anything you feel is not clear or anything you want me to add or something, we can discuss it. We have around 10 minutes of time. So we have discussed a lot of things today. Uh, Yeah, so someone is asking, is it possible to go first too high and medium and then low gradually? So very good, valid point, Sharath. So you will see that that is how you will train a neural network in our assignment, not in the first assignment, but the final assignment. So you start with a high learning rate, and as you are reaching the global minima, you try to reduce the learning rate so that you will actually settle. So that is a very good strategy. So it's great that you are able to figure out that strategy. Awesome. So yeah, Jashandeep is saying, so we will still get results if we are going slowly. That is fine. Yes, you will still get results. You will reach the global minima, but the problem is like it will take a lot of time till you reach there. So instead of taking like 1 hour or 2 hours, it might take 3 days, 4 days. So that is a waste of your training time and similarly the computational resources. So we have covered a lot of topics today. So after I will be sharing the presentation, just go through them again. We'll be again going through them briefly in the next class so that these things will be clear. Again, I'll be sharing the videos, go through the videos as well. That will clear your concepts even more. So you have, okay, someone is asking for the WhatsApp link. So human gesture detection, you generally use deep learning because machine learning is not very good. It will give you 20% accuracy or something like that. So you don't use machine learning, you will be using deep learning. Yeah, so we have class tomorrow since it's a weekend, right? So I know we are going at a faster pace, but since the videos will be available, you can go through them anytime. Yeah, so I'll be doing that. I'll share that thing. I'll share all the new previous messages. So this is the link for the WhatsApp group. So if you have any doubts, ping in the WhatsApp group. Anyone else who is present in the group can help, or I'll be there to help as well. So let's use this WhatsApp group to share our doubts. Also, apart from that, we'll be having assignments. So at that time, it is very crucial that you work with each other and say what are all the things you have tried out for each other, so that you can actually proceed forward. Thanks, Ishwar. So yeah, great. So if anyone has doubts, we still have 5 minutes, or otherwise you can leave. I'll be there for 5 minutes. So we have covered a lot of topics and we have gone at a faster pace. So it might be a little bit vague at this point of time. So again, try to revise these topics. Again, I will be sharing those videos as well. So yeah, you can go through them. That would make the concepts even more clear. And if possible, try to go through the videos before you can come to the next class tomorrow, so that it will be clearer. Yes. So what happened is Microsoft has something called as Kinect, which used random forest, but it used it some 10-12 years ago. They have moved away from that. They won't be using a random forest now. It used a long time ago, but not now. Because now it will be giving very less accuracy compared to a deep learning model. So any other doubts you have, you can. Yeah, is it always beneficial to use deep learning or ML? So you can't say that, but what we have seen over the past few years is like for use cases of image, text, and similarly speech, deep learning outperforms machine learning. But in tabular data, like there is no clear winner. Sometimes this performs good, sometimes that performs good. Also, one more reason why people might use machine learning more than deep learning is because deep learning kind of behaves like a black box. People don't understand how it is working. We know that it is giving better results, but they don't understand how it is able to take the decision that it is taking to give that results. Although there have been improvements about it. So what happens is if a neural network gives a decision and data actually gives a very wrong decision, right? For example, like in a self-driving car, it goes and kills a person. So if you ask it, ideally it should be able to answer why it took that decision. If it is not able to do that, that is something very risky. So that was something of a problem previously. Deep learning was not able to do that. It couldn't tell why it took the decision. It can only tell that it took the decision. So people are trying to solve that now. Deep learning also, there are insights about why it is taking that decision. What are all the things that it took into consideration when it took that decision? So yeah, that is something which is the reason many people used to use machine learning or deep learning, because they wanted to have that knowledge. What are the things that went into consideration when it took the decision, and not treat it like a black box. Deep learning was kind of like a black box previously, but now it is coming over, and people have started coming up with techniques which can actually give you insights about what deep learning looks like as well. Yeah, so image detection is possible with ML, but it will give subpar results compared to deep learning. But it is possible. Before deep learning came out, people were using ML only. Various other techniques in machine learning only they were using. So something like Hog, Boyle Jones, different kinds of techniques were there which were used for image detection. So deep learning was not popular mainly because the computational power that is required to run a neural network was not available before 2012. So that's when not many tried out, but it was possible after 2012 with the advancement in computational power and availability of GPUs. So that's why it has become popular afterwards. But before that, people used to use computer vision techniques and machine learning to solve the problem of all the tasks that we have seen before, including image detection.